On the surface, Naomi Judd seemed the picture of perfection, a glamorous beauty living her dream life as a celebrated musician touring the country with her daughter Winona. But on the inside, there was pain and the persistent haunting of a difficult past.
When Larry Strickland stood before cameras in 2025, his hands trembled as he spoke about a night that nearly destroyed everything. For over 3 decades, the world knew Naomi Judd as country music royalty, one half of the Judds, a woman who turned pain into platinum records. But behind the Grammy Awards and sold-out shows, there was a marriage holding secrets so dark that when Larry finally revealed them, even Naomi's closest fans were left speechless. What happened on that night when a phone call shattered their home? What truth had been buried for so long? And why did it take Naomi's tragic death for her husband to finally speak? The night everything shattered. Larry Strickland will never forget coming home that evening in the late 1980s. He had been on tour with his gospel group, traveling from city to city, performing in churches and concert halls across the South. The tour had lasted nearly a month, taking him through Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. He was exhausted from the road, looking forward to sleeping in his own bed and seeing Naomi after weeks apart. When he walked through the front door of the Nashville home he shared with Naomi, something felt wrong immediately. The air was heavy, silent. There was no music playing, no sound of Naomi moving around the house, no greeting at the door. And then he saw it. Their wedding photos, torn to shreds and scattered across the floor. Frames were broken, glass shattered everywhere. Pictures of their wedding day at Christ Church, images of them smiling together on their honeymoon, snapshots of happier times, all destroyed. His clothes, carefully packed in suitcases and bags, had been thrown onto the front lawn like garbage. Shirts, pants, jackets, shoes, everything he owned was outside, some items already wet from the Tennessee humidity. Larry's heart was racing as he walked further into the house. He called out Naomi's name, but there was no response. When he reached their bedroom, he found her standing there. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen from crying. But what stopped him cold was what she held in her hands. A gun. A registered handgun they kept in the house for protection. The weapon was pointed directly at him. Larry froze. His mouth went dry. He had seen Naomi upset before, seen her struggle with emotions that came in powerful waves. But this was different. This was something else entirely. There was a look in her eyes he had never seen before. A mixture of betrayal, rage, and complete devastation. He tried to speak, tried to ask what was wrong, tried to take a step toward her. But before he could get the words out, before he could even process what was happening, Naomi pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot rang through the house. It was deafening, echoing off the walls, making Larry's ears ring so loudly he couldn't hear anything else. Time seemed to slow down. Larry's entire body went into shock. His ears were ringing, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. He looked down at himself, expecting to see blood, expecting to feel pain. But when the shock faded and his vision cleared, he realized something. The bullet had missed. He was still alive. Whether Naomi had intentionally missed, or whether her hand had shaken at the last second, he would never know. For what felt like an eternity, they just stood there. Naomi was still holding the gun, her hand trembling. Larry was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak. Finally, without saying a word, he turned around and walked out of the bedroom. He grabbed what little of his belongings he could find that hadn't been destroyed or thrown outside, packed them into his car, and drove away. For decades, this moment remained hidden. locked away. A secret that only two people knew. Larry never called the police. He didn't file a report. He didn't tell family or friends what had happened. He didn't even tell Naomi's daughters, Winona and Ashley, who were living their own lives at the time. He simply left the house and stayed away for several weeks, trying to process what had just happened and whether his marriage could survive. Naomi eventually reached out. She called him, left voicemails, sent letters. She apologized. She begged him to come back. She promised it would never happen again. And after weeks of thinking, Larry made a decision. He went back. They sat down together and had a long, painful conversation about what had driven Naomi to that breaking point. And together, they made what Larry later called a silent agreement. They would bury this night. They would never speak of it publicly. They would lock it away and try to move forward. For love, for their careers, for the children, for the image they had built together. In 1995, 5 years after the incident, a television movie called Naomi and Winona, Love Can Build a Bridge, aired on NBC. The movie told the story of the Judds' rise to fame, their struggles, and their family dynamics. In one scene, the character playing Naomi fires a gun during an argument with her husband. At the time, viewers watched the scene as a dramatized moment, something created for television to add tension to the story. The movie was praised for its emotional depth, but nobody knew that the gun scene was based on reality. Naomi and Larry never confirmed or denied that the scene was real. They just moved on. The Judds were at the height of their fame. Award shows, sold-out concerts, television appearances, their lives were filled with success and public adoration. No one questioned whether the dramatized scene in the TV movie had any truth to it. Fans assumed it was Hollywood exaggeration. Critics thought it was creative license. And Naomi and Larry let them think that. But in 2025, 3 years after Naomi's tragic death, Larry finally broke his silence. In the Lifetime documentary, The Judd Family. Truth be told, he sat down for an interview and admitted what really happened that night. The cameras were rolling as he spoke carefully, choosing his words with precision. "It really happened," he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "That's all I can say. It happened." The question everyone wanted answered was simple. Why? What could drive a woman to point a gun at her husband and pull the trigger? What kind of pain could lead to such a desperate, violent act? The answer would reveal a betrayal that cut deeper than anyone imagined. The betrayal that broke her. 24 hours before Naomi fired that gun, she received a phone call that destroyed her world. Larry was away on tour. Naomi was home alone. The phone rang, and a woman's voice came through. A stranger. Someone Naomi had never met. The woman told Naomi she was in love with Larry. She shared personal details, intimate things only someone close to him would know. She called him her soulmate. The conversation lasted minutes, but for Naomi, it felt like hours. When she hung up, she didn't cry or scream. She went silent. For 24 hours, she didn't speak to Larry at all. She sat with the pain, with images of her husband with another woman running through her mind. That pain turned into something darker. Larry later confirmed in the documentary that he had been unfaithful. The phone call wasn't a lie. He had cheated on his wife. And now she knew. For someone like Naomi, who spent her entire life fearing abandonment, this betrayal was devastating. She grew up in poverty in Ashland, Kentucky, watching her mother battle mental illness. She had been a single mother, working night shifts as a nurse after her first marriage ended in divorce. She built walls to protect herself from that kind of pain. And the one person she thought she could trust had shattered those walls. When Larry came home, he walked into destruction. Naomi had torn apart everything symbolizing their love. Then she stood with the gun, hands shaking, eyes filled with rage and heartbreak. Larry later said he believed she wasn't trying to kill him. She was screaming for help the only way she knew how. She was drowning and didn't know how to survive it. The bullet missed, but the damage was done. Larry left for weeks, but eventually they reconciled. They stayed together another 33 years. However, their marriage was never the same. The trust had been broken, and some wounds run too deep to fully heal. A marriage built on fame and fractures. To truly understand what happened that night, you have to go back to the very beginning of Naomi and Larry's relationship. Naomi Judd met Larry Strickland in 1979 at a music event in Nashville, Tennessee. At the time, Naomi was not the country music superstar she would later become. She was a 33-year-old single mother working as a registered nurse in the intensive care unit at Williamson Medical Center. Her life was hard, exhausting, and filled with constant struggle. She had two daughters, Winona, who was 14 years old, and Ashley, who was 11. After her divorce from Michael Simonella, Naomi had been raising the girls on her own, working long hours to support them. Money was always tight. There were times when Naomi had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. She worked night shifts because they paid slightly more, even though it meant being away from her daughters during the hours when they needed her most. Winona often took on a motherly role with Ashley, making sure her younger sister got to school on time, did her homework, and had something to eat for dinner. It was a childhood marked by instability and constant moving. The family relocated frequently, living in different towns across Kentucky and Tennessee as Naomi searched for better job opportunities. But despite all the hardship, Naomi never gave up on her love for music. She sang around the house, wrote songs in her spare time, and dreamed of someday making it in the music industry. That dream brought her to a small music event in Nashville, where local artists and musicians gathered to network and perform. It was there, in that modest venue, that she met Larry Strickland. Larry came from a very different world. He was born and raised in North Carolina and had been involved in gospel music since he was a teenager. By the time he met Naomi, he was already an established gospel singer with J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet, one of the most respected gospel groups in the South. Larry's career had taken him to places most musicians only dreamed of. He had toured with Elvis Presley during the 1970s, singing backup vocals during some of Elvis's most iconic performances in Las Vegas and across the United States. He had performed at the Grand Ole Opry, recorded albums, and built a solid reputation in the gospel music community. When Naomi and Larry met, they were immediately drawn to each other. Naomi was full of energy, passion, and determination. She had a fire in her eyes that came from years of fighting to survive and refusing to give up on her dreams. Larry was the opposite in many ways: quiet, steady, and deeply loyal. He was a man of few words, someone who preferred to let his actions speak louder than his voice. He had a calming presence that balanced out Naomi's intensity. They started dating, and their relationship grew slowly over the course of 10 years. During that decade, Naomi's life changed dramatically. She and Winona began performing together as the Judds, starting with small gigs at local venues and county fairs. Their harmonies were powerful, their stage presence undeniable, and word began to spread about the mother-daughter duo with incredible voices. In 1983, they landed a recording contract with RCA Records. Their first single, Had a Dream for the Heart, was released and became a modest hit. But it was their subsequent releases that catapulted them to stardom. Songs like Mama, He's Crazy, Why Not Me, and Grandpa, Tell Me About the Good Old Days topped the country music charts and won them Grammy Awards. The Judds became one of the most successful acts in country music during the 1980s, selling millions of albums and performing to sold-out crowds across the United States. Naomi had gone from working night shifts as a nurse, struggling to pay rent, to performing on the biggest stages in country music, wearing designer gowns and accepting prestigious awards. On May 6, 1989, after 10 years of dating, Naomi and Larry married at Christ Church in Nashville. The ceremony was beautiful, attended by family, friends, and some of the biggest names in country music. By this point, Naomi was at the height of her career. The Judds were touring constantly, releasing hit after hit, and building a legacy that would make them legends in the industry. But fame came with a heavy price. Naomi was constantly under pressure from record label executives, management teams, publicists, and the media. Every move she made was scrutinized. Every interview was analyzed. Every performance was critiqued. The demands of touring meant long days on the road, living out of buses and hotel rooms, performing night after night in different cities with little time for rest or recovery. The constant travel, the lack of privacy, the pressure to maintain a perfect public image, it all began to take a toll on Naomi's mental and physical health. In 1990, just 1 year after her wedding to Larry, Naomi received devastating news. She was diagnosed with hepatitis C, a potentially life-threatening liver disease that she likely contracted years earlier through accidental exposure during her time working as a nurse in the ICU. The diagnosis was a shock. Doctors told her that the disease could be fatal if left untreated, and even with treatment, there were no guarantees of recovery. The illness forced Naomi to make an impossible decision. At the peak of the Judds' career, when they were selling out arenas and topping the charts, she announced her retirement from performing. The final tour, aptly named the Farewell Tour, was an emotional journey across the country. Fans packed venues to see the Judds one last time. Naomi and Wynonna performed their hearts out every night, knowing that each show could be their last together. The tour ended in December 1991 with a televised pay-per-view concert that became one of the highest-rated musical events of the decade. After retiring from music, Naomi had to focus on her health. She underwent intensive treatment for hepatitis C, including experimental therapies that left her physically weak and emotionally drained. The treatments were painful, the side effects severe, and the fear of dying was constant. Larry stood by her side throughout the ordeal, but the emotional toll of her illness created enormous strain in their marriage. During this time, Larry continued touring with his gospel group. Music was his career, his passion, and his livelihood. He couldn't simply stop working, especially when medical bills were piling up, and Naomi was unable to perform. But his absences meant that Naomi was often alone at home, dealing with her illness, her fear, and her growing sense of isolation. She felt abandoned, even though she understood that Larry needed to work. As Naomi slowly recovered from hepatitis C, miraculously, the treatments worked, and she eventually beat the disease. She began focusing on new projects. She started appearing on television talk shows, wrote several books about her life and health journey, and became an advocate for hepatitis C awareness and mental health issues. She spoke openly about her struggles, inspiring millions of people who were facing similar challenges. But behind the scenes, life at home was far from perfect. The pressures of fame hadn't disappeared just because Naomi was no longer performing. If anything, they had intensified. She was now juggling multiple careers, author, television personality, advocate, public speaker, all while trying to maintain a marriage and a relationship with her two daughters, who were building their own careers. Winona had continued performing as a solo artist after the Judds retired, achieving massive success with hit songs and sold-out tours. Ashley had become a successful actress, starring in films and establishing herself in Hollywood. Both daughters were busy with their own lives, and Naomi often felt like she was losing connection with them. The challenges of blending a family also created tension. Larry had his own career, his own friends, his own life outside of Naomi's world. There were disagreements about money, about priorities, about how to handle the constant demands from the public and the media. And beneath it all, there were unresolved emotional issues that neither of them knew how to address. It was during this period of stress, isolation, and unresolved tension that Larry's infidelity occurred. The affair was a breaking point, a moment when all the cracks in their marriage became impossible to ignore. And it led to the night that would haunt both of them for the rest of their lives. The mental illness no one saw. Even after they reconciled, Naomi's mental health declined in shocking ways. Starting in the early 2000s, Naomi was diagnosed with severe depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and sleep disorders. Each condition alone would be challenging, but together they created an unbearable burden. Her depression caused constant sadness and hopelessness. Anxiety created excessive worry and fear. PTSD brought painful memories with intense reactions. Sleep disorders made peace impossible. Naomi spent time in inpatient facilities receiving round-the-clock care. She underwent electroconvulsive therapy, a treatment using controlled electric currents to relieve severe depression when other treatments fail. Despite these efforts, the years between 2011 and 2013 were especially difficult. Larry described this period as when Naomi became increasingly disoriented and isolated. She struggled to recognize familiar faces. She withdrew from everyone, even family. Larry felt helpless watching her slip away, unable to reach her. Video footage from her final years captured heartbreaking glimpses of her condition. Her eyes appeared vacant, distant. Physically, she looked thinner, weaker. Emotionally, she seemed withdrawn, living in a separate world. Larry later admitted that for 13 years, he was with Naomi constantly. He monitored medications, encouraged eating and exercise. But looking back, he wished he'd been gentler. "If I had known where she was," he said, "I would have been much softer, more compassionate instead of tired and exhausted because it was wearing me out too." The truth was, Larry didn't fully understand how sick Naomi was. "It never entered my mind that she was as sick as she was," he confessed. He thought pushing her to stay active would help. But Naomi wasn't just tired. She was contemplating something far more final: the final days and shocking will. In April 2022, Naomi made a sudden trip to Vienna, Austria. She didn't share the purpose. Larry didn't go with her. The reasons remain unclear. Whether for treatment, rest, or escape from pressure, the mystery adds sadness to her final days. When Naomi returned to Nashville, those close noticed a change for the worse. She seemed more exhausted, emotionally distant. She was preparing for her Country Music Hall of Fame induction with Winona, but couldn't enjoy it. On April 30th, 2022, one day before the ceremony, tragedy struck. Naomi passed away at her Tennessee home from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Ashley found her. The timing made it heartbreaking. Naomi died hours before being honored at the Hall of Fame. Despite overwhelming grief, the family proceeded with the ceremony. Winona delivered a moving speech through tears about their complicated relationship and deep love. Larry stayed quiet, offering silent tribute through his presence, but more shock came after Naomi's death. Her will, created in November 2017, left her entire $25 million estate to Larry. The will didn't mention Winona or Ashley by name. This revelation sparked widespread discussion. Winona was reportedly upset, believing she'd been a major force behind her mother's success. Estate experts explained this was common for long-term marriages and had tax advantages, but it revealed emotional complexity. Personal materials surfaced after Naomi's death. Voicemails between Naomi and her daughters revealed hurt, frustration, and misunderstanding. Journal entries and unsent letters showed how conflicted Naomi felt. She expressed deep love, but also confusion and guilt, wrestling with regret and longing for reconciliation. Ashley's memoir had already revealed feeling abandoned, not just physically when her mother toured, but emotionally. Winona, though closer through music, dealt with unresolved tensions. The will, voicemails, and journals painted a picture of a woman who cared deeply but was overwhelmed by her own pain. Larry's confession and the truth revealed. After 2 years of quiet mourning, Larry Strickland stepped forward to share his experiences. His most significant public appearance came in the 2025 Lifetime documentary, The Judd Family: Truth Be Told, which aired 3 years after Naomi's death. In this documentary, Larry sat down for what he knew would be a difficult and emotional interview. He appeared on camera looking older, the years of grief and stress visible on his face, but also determined to finally tell the truth about his marriage to Naomi and the challenges they had faced together. It was in this interview that Larry confirmed, for the first time publicly, the shooting incident that had occurred in their home decades earlier. For years, people had speculated about whether the scene in the 1995 TV movie Love Can Build a Bridge was based on reality, but neither Larry nor Naomi had ever confirmed it. Now, with Naomi gone and no longer here to be hurt by the revelation, Larry felt it was time to be honest. "It really happened," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "That's all I can say about it. It happened." He didn't go into graphic detail about the moment itself, the sound of the gunshot, the fear he felt, the chaos of that night. But he confirmed that the incident was real, that Naomi had indeed fired a gun during their marriage. Rather than using this confession to portray himself as a victim or to paint Naomi in a negative light, Larry approached the topic with remarkable compassion and understanding. He explained that he had come to view the shooting not as an act of malice or hatred, but as a manifestation of Naomi's deep psychological wounds. "Her actions were not rooted in anger at me," he explained. "They were expressions of her internal turmoil, her pain, her fear of abandonment. She was screaming for help in the only way she knew how in that moment." Larry also acknowledged his own role in the crisis that led to that night. He admitted to his infidelity, confirming that he had been unfaithful to Naomi and that his betrayal had triggered the breakdown that resulted in the shooting. He didn't make excuses for his behavior or try to minimize the impact of what he had done. He took responsibility for the pain he had caused. This level of honesty and self-reflection was rare, especially for someone in the public eye. Larry could have continued to keep these secrets buried, could have protected his reputation, and avoided the judgment that would inevitably come from admitting to infidelity and other marital problems. But he made the choice to be truthful, believing that honesty might help others who were dealing with similar situations. Larry also spoke at length about the regrets he carried regarding how he had handled Naomi's mental illness during their final years together. He described the last months before her death as a very chaotic and hectic time, noting that Naomi's energy levels had significantly declined, and she seemed to be fading before his eyes. He shared that he had tried to help by encouraging her to maintain healthy habits, eating nutritious meals, going for walks, taking her medications on schedule, staying active. At the time, he thought he was doing the right thing, that keeping her on a routine and pushing her to take care of herself physically would help improve her mental state. But looking back, Larry realized that his approach had been misguided. "If I had known where she was, mentally and emotionally," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I would have been much softer on her. I would have been more gentle and understanding. Instead of pushing her to eat or exercise, I should have just held her more. I should have told her I loved her more. I should have just been there with her in her pain instead of trying to fix everything." The regret in his voice was palpable. This kind of self-awareness and willingness to examine his own mistakes showed a man who had spent the years since Naomi's death reflecting deeply on their relationship and what he could have done differently. In his interview with People magazine, Larry opened up even more about the emotional toll Naomi's death had taken on him personally. "For over 13 years, I was by her side constantly," he revealed. "I mean literally. I was with her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I didn't go anywhere without telling her exactly where I was going and when I'd be back. I monitored her medications. I made sure she ate. I tried to keep her safe. When you have a mate that has a mental illness, you walk that path with them. You become their caretaker, their advocate, their support system. It becomes your entire life." The exhaustion in his words was clear. Caring for someone with severe mental illness is incredibly demanding, both physically and emotionally. Larry had essentially put his own life on hold for over a decade to focus on Naomi's needs, and when she died, he not only lost his wife, he lost his purpose, his daily routine, the role that had defined his existence for years. After Naomi's passing, Larry found solace and meaning in speaking out about their experiences. He partnered with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMY, one of the largest mental health advocacy organizations in the United States, to raise funds and awareness for mental health issues. He began giving interviews, sharing his story, and encouraging others who were caring for loved ones with mental illness. His advocacy work focused on several key messages. First, he wanted to break down the stigma surrounding mental health issues. He emphasized that mental illness is a disease, not a weakness or a character flaw. Just as people seek treatment for cancer or heart disease without shame, people should be able to seek help for depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions without fear of judgment. In one interview, Larry summed up his mission simply: "If Naomi's death can help save even one life, if our story can encourage even one person to seek help or one family to have important conversations about mental health, then maybe there's some meaning in all this pain. That's what I hope for." What are your thoughts about the truth revealed by Naomi's husband? Share with us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.